I am delighted to finally meet you. Your father would be so proud of you.
Your Majesty is very kind, and I am sure my father, Martin Luther King Jr., would have been as honored as I am to share his thoughts and visions with you.
Very well, but my role as a monarch obliges me to show some self-restraint.
Your Majesty has showed courage and support on many occasions, though.
This is what my friend Billy Graham used to tell me.
Oh yes, I remember my father telling me about Reverend Billy Graham.
He was the most influential preacher of the 20th century. He helped shape the modern concept of an American religious life. His broadcast sermons, both on TV and radio, seemed not to leave any corner of the United States and perhaps even the world untouched by his words.
Sure. My father told me he embraced the civil rights movement, inviting him to speak at his events, while offering spiritual advice to every president from Harry Truman to Barack Obama.
Your father was such a great figure. He was an African-American Baptist minister and activist who became the most visible spokesperson and leader in the American civil rights movement from 1955 until his assassination in 1968. Your father advanced civil rights through nonviolence and civil disobedience, inspired by his Christian beliefs and the nonviolent activism of Mahatma Gandhi.
My father participated in and led marches for blacks' right to vote, desegregation, labor rights, and other basic civil rights. Furthermore, he also led the 1955 Montgomery bus boycott and later became the first president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference.
Oh, the famous 1955 Montgomery bus boycott.
Yes, it all started in March 1955, and Claudette Colvine, a 15-year-old black schoolgirl in Montgomery, who refused to give up her bus seat to a white man in violation of Jim Crow laws, local laws in the southern United States that enforced racial segregation.
I remember you further being on the committee from the Birmingham African American community that looked into the case. Nixon and Clifford Tower decided to wait for a better case to pursue because the incident involved a minor.
And 9 months later, on December 1, 1955, a similar incident occurred when Rosa Parks was arrested for refusing to give up her seat on a city bus. The two incidents led to the Montgomery bus boycott, which was urged and planned by Nixon and led by my father.
The controversy ended when the United States District Court issued a ruling that prohibited racial segregation on all Montgomery public buses. Blacks resumed riding the buses again, and were able to sit in the front with full legal authorization.
The boycott lasted for 385 days, and the situation became so tense that King's house was bombed. My father was arrested and jailed during this campaign, which overnight drew the attention of national media, and greatly increased his public stature.
Yes, and not to mention when he helped organize the 1963 March on Washington, where he delivered his famous "I Have a Dream" speech on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. And on October 14, 1964, your father won the Nobel Peace Prize for combating racial inequality through nonviolent resistance.
In his final years, my father expanded his focus to include opposition towards poverty, capitalism, and the Vietnam War. In 1968, he was planning a national occupation of Washington, D.C., to be called the Poor People's Campaign, when he was assassinated on April 4 in Memphis, Tennessee.
Your father influenced so many people, even outside the USA.
Your Majesty is very well documented. My father surely would have loved to meet you when he broke his trip to Oslo to preach a scholarly sermon at St. Paul's Cathedral in 1964.
Your father's sermons echoed in my very country. I remember a young girl. She was 15 when she read Goat Hellet on the Mountain by James Baldwin. Next came the works of Richard Wright, and of course the sermons of Martin Luther King Jr. as well as Malcolm X, all of whom sparked in her a desire to explore and interrogate what blackness is, and not just from the African American experience of her reading. What was her name again?
Her name was Beverly Bryan.
Oh. You seem to be very well documented too.
You do not meet Her Majesty without doing your homework.
Well, I couldn't expect less from you. Beverly Bryan, yes, it rings a bell to me.
After her friend Olive Morris was assaulted by police in 1969, Beverly Bryan joined her in the civil rights group, becoming a British Black Panther, a founder member of the Brixton Black Women's Group.
Definitely. After finishing school, Bryan went to teacher training college in Kiel, Staffordshire. By the time she saw Morris again, her friend's life had changed. In November 1969, 17-year-old Morris came to the defense of a Nigerian diplomat, as he was being arrested and accused of stealing his own Mercedes. Morris was brutally assaulted. When Morris saw Bryan in 1970, she told her she had a plan to join the British Black Panthers. And so she joined, too.
This Black Power organization was unaffiliated with its U.S. counterpart, but had the same principal aim, to serve its local community.
Yes, and so, Beverly Bryan spent her free time running one of the group's Saturday schools, offering supplementary lessons in maths and English, to combat the racial discrimination rife in education and to teach children Black history. The Panthers would pick up the children from their homes, to ensure the school also functioned as a free childcare service. Yet Bryan always knew what she wanted to do, teach. After training college, she moved to Brixton so she could work in a Black community. She was offered a job at Santley Primary School on the spot when she visited the school, and given no chance to change her mind. The vast majority of her young students were Black, and Bryan was determined that her teaching would revolve around a curriculum that made them feel proud of who they were.
Nevertheless, and despite her work to fight for equality in the UK, Bryan always knew she would return to Jamaica. The police violence she witnessed played a role in her decision, in 1992, to relocate with her husband and sons.
Their relocation is a great loss for our nation. I wish I had had such a positive influence.
But Your Majesty seems to forget her commitment to the Commonwealth.
Don't be mistaken, for I could not forget it, as there is no other international organization that can match the pedigree and record of the Commonwealth in striving for the progressive goals of strengthened democracy, sustainable development and respect for diversity.
True, the special strength of the Commonwealth lies in the diversity of its membership, bound together not only by shared history and tradition but also by an ethos of respect for all states and peoples, of shared values and principles, and of concern for the vulnerable.
In 1961, in the height of the Cold War, Britain and America feared Ghana would leave the Commonwealth and fall under the influence of the Soviet Union. I could not let it be.
Not let it be. No one will ever forget Queen Elizabeth II and Ghanaian President Kwame Nkrumah danced to a version of High Life at a farewell ball held at State House, Accra. It was a subtle yet powerful move and statement Your Majesty alone could afford.
But you know how easy it is to underestimate the power of such a simple act 60 years on. But the November dance came just 6 months after Ku Klux Klan members firebombed a bus of Freedom Riders.
This dance showed how Your Majesty was not resistant to decolonization but wanted a new relationship with countries that had been part of Britain's empire, now embracing something which was a multiracial, voluntary, friendly association of independent nations.
A dance not as vibrant as your father's speech.
Let us say that, as William Shakespeare put it, all the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances.
Very well said, Mr. Martin Luther King III.
Before leaving Your Majesty, I would quote my father.
Oh yes, what a delightful and precious conclusion, for I also have a dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
From the bottom of my heart, I thank you.